Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 22 for October 28th, 2016. Hey everybody, Daniel Rubino here, joined again by Zach Bowden for the Windows Central Podcast. We've had a busy week this week, and we're actually doing this live for the first time. However, if you're listening to this on a Monday, it's not live anymore. You probably downloaded it. So you should listen to it on Fridays when we actually record this. And we're also streaming it on youtube.com because we love Google. Google's the best. So we got a busy schedule here for today. We're going to be talking about, of course, the big updates this week from the Microsoft October event in New York City. We got the Windows 10 Creators Update, Paint 3D, Surface Book, Surface Studio, our thoughts about Apple. I'll reword actually how we have that written. And the Lenovo book, my thoughts on that, as I just got one last night. Zach, how you doing today?
Not too bad. How are you? Been a pretty busy week, for me at least.
Yeah, lots of traveling to New York City. I take one of my headphones out. I don't like wearing two headphones and then talking. It sounds weird.
Yeah, I like both of mine in, but we're both using the Elite X3 headphones, and we both agree they're not all that comfortable.
Yeah, they're not so bad, but yeah. So it was a pretty good week. Obviously, New York City was a lot of fun. It was both. I don't know. It's always fun on these events when we do our what to expect, and we're always close. But you got to give Microsoft some credit here that they're. Are we having issues?
No.
Okay. No, but I was gonna say Microsoft's been very good at keeping secrets so far, and once again they kind of surprised us with. I don't know. With the Surface Studio, the Windows 10 thing.
Yeah.
What about the name? Tell us about this Creators Update.
Kind of everything. The update, for starters, the Windows 10 Redstone 2 is what we've been calling up until now. Finally got a name, the Creators Update, which I personally dislike immensely. I thought the Anniversary Update name was bad. This is worse. I don't like their kind of themed names. It's an odd new strategy for Microsoft's naming.
But what would you rather them call it?
I don't know, something different. Version 1703. Just call it that, which is what they will refer to it as, but just call it that. Why do they have to call it the Creators Update?
Because it has a theme, it has a purpose. It's also easy to say. 1703, that's the old Microsoft. That's the internal stuff.
Yeah, but
I kind of like the naming update.
Creators Update is so many texts, it's like more characters in tweets, and it's just so much more annoying. Regardless,
not quite as long as the Anniversary Update.
That's true, but we could refer to that as AU, whereas you can't do that with the Creators Update because we refer to CU as a cumulative update.
It's fine. Anyway, I like Creators Update. I thought this was really interesting, just about how they actually have like this theme, which we all missed, right? We didn't know what the overarching sort of description of this update was going to be, if there was going to be one, and now we see that there will be these kind of themes. And so Creators Update, I thought this whole presentation was really good by Nadella, his speech at the end, and of course everybody else before there. But basically there was this concept about pushing PCs forward. You know, this idea that the last 10 years of PCs have been, well, it's been interesting, right? They're thinner, they're faster, whatever. But the desktop is sort of not dying, it just became less important as we basically got more screens with our smartphones and tablets. And now they're trying to kind of reinvent where this stuff is going by creating new hardware for it. And I thought this idea of like, you could tell mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, along with inking, you combine all those together and they're trying to, put a new spin on like how you can use computing. And I thought it was a really smart way to sort of bring back innovation in the PC industry by focusing on doing things that we can do now that we couldn't do 5 years ago. This, all this augmented reality, mixed reality stuff it's dependent upon where technology is right now. So it's about category creation. And it's not easy what they're doing. Like, yeah, I would have never thought of this topic as something that they could have done. But I thought the presentations were really good. A little, a lot of this stuff wasn't completely solid, right? We know the virtual reality headsets don't come out till December, and they'll give us more information then. A lot of the stuff they showed was conceptual. It wasn't actually coded right, so we didn't get an update this week with all that stuff. But this stuff's coming. But I don't know. I thought it shows direction and vision, And I'm starting to get the impression that all these updates and timelines for Windows, there's actually a plan, which we're not kind of privy to, right? We sort of get these updates and it's like, all right, new features, new stuff, But having new features along with like a message and a theme to it, I think is a lot more easy to wrap around. It's also very good for marketing.
Yeah, I mean, like this creators update specifically. I mean, we've always known through like reports and just whispers that Resident 2 would be focusing on productivity. And I guess you could class creativity as some form of productivity. And Microsoft themselves even demoed Office, like, inking it within Word and all of that stuff at their event. Being creative doesn't necessarily mean drawing pictures. You can be all kinds of creative. There's many forms of creativity out there. And with this update, it caters to many different creators and even non-creators. Not only is it just, more inking stuff, there's more like social stuff, like the My People bar, which is like a new thing in the bottom right of the taskbar where you can have like your favorite people pinned straight to the taskbar, and you can click on their icon, send them files, and message them directly from the taskbar. Pretty nice. Again, what we saw at this week's event was more conceptual, but they have announced it now, which means hopefully we should see it arrive with the creators updates in March next year. There's even smaller things like Windows Defender's getting a new user interface, and again, that's nothing to do with creators at all, is it?
Right.
That's still getting an update. Improvements to Microsoft Edge, Action Center improvements, pick up where you left off, which is a thing that we reported about a while ago, which is basically, you're working in an app on your phone, then you open the same app on your desktop, and that experience, it picks up where you left off on your phone, so kind of syncing app states across devices. The beginnings of that was in Redstone 1, but now they're actually adding like a UI element to it, so Cortana can pop up and say, hey, you've got an app open on another device, I can resume that app from here, and she'll do it. Nice stuff like that. More personalization improvements, so you can now like pick any color you want for your accent color, which is nice. Then you've also got, I think Microsoft are planning to sell themes in the Windows Store, which is kind of interesting, especially since
sell themes.
Yeah, it's in the picture that they showed in the trailer, which I think we can actually play here. It was, it wasn't there were numbers to buy.
Okay.
So that's not good, I guess, because let's be fair.
Well,
you can just, put a wallpaper on for free.
Yeah, although I guess if it's tied into like audio and icons and all that kind of stuff, and it's sort of like a package, then it could definitely be more interesting. I actually don't mind this. I mean, we got the OS for free, many of us, and so I don't really mind.
Yeah, they got
these kind of
somehow.
Yeah, I don't really mind. It's same with in-app purchases. I think some people still are bothered by this concept. I have absolutely no issue whatsoever because you're obviously never required to buy things. So who cares if a company makes an offer? But yeah, so clearly the idea that this is a creators update is only part of it, and they probably took the biggest lump of features and then decided to coalesce around that for the messaging. But yeah, I really liked the people bar aspect and the idea you could just drag and drop stuff to them, and I think that's a really useful and interesting way to use how modern computers are. And you can kind of envision how that would tie into mobile at some point if this stuff uses your phone to send things. And eventually your phone will be kind of part of the OS itself, and you'll be able to interact with it. At least that seems to be the long-term goal of a lot of these updates and bringing mobile and PC together. Of course, they didn't really talk at all about mobile, and a lot of people pointed that out, but I don't really find that too surprising.
I mean, a lot of people pointed it out mainly because there were reports that stated, Redstone 2 would focus on mobile. Now, Microsoft, I've mentioned this in the podcast before as well. Microsoft's development cycle isn't, one big bang release. Mobile focus is spread out across many releases: Redstone 2, Redstone 3, and Redstone 4. So with Redstone 2, you're getting productivity improvements with Continuum. So windowed mode, more customization options within like Continuum. The Continuum experience will look more like the desktop experience of Redstone 2. That's the plan anyway. Then Redstone 3 will focus on something else, bring something new. Redstone 4, same thing. There's no, Microsoft isn't planning one big Windows 10 mobile release with a bunch of new features. That's just not how Microsoft develops Windows anymore. That's the same with the desktop. There's no one big Windows desktop release. It's just smaller, chopped up into 2 or 3 updates a year, which is, I guess, better. But again, for people who are looking for one big bang release, you're not going to get that anymore. So for those expecting Redstone 2 to be like a huge Windows 10 mobile release, you need to lower your expectations. A lot of the things Microsoft are working on for Windows 10 Mobile are to cater for new devices. Continuum, I guess Windows Ink at some point. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that didn't show up. And that would obviously be something for new devices, as older handsets don't have inking capabilities. This would be for newer devices that have inking capabilities, Windows Ink, and a bunch of other stuff. So people need to realize that there's no big bang release and just kind of stop waiting for one, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. It was definitely, I like the messaging. The VR stuff I thought was really interesting too. What comes to mobile, I think, we've talked about this before. Whatever they create for mobile is, I don't think they're even going to call it a phone. It's going to be called Surface Mobile or something. We had a couple ideas about that. But somehow I think it's going to mix in this idea of mixed reality, virtual reality, inking, all that to some sort of mobile thing. But that's not going to happen for a while. Right now, they're just building out this system. But I have heard from sources there is a plan for mobile. And I think, what that is exactly, of course, it's all about the details. And even this week, we had a lot of leaks leading up to this announcement, specifically to hardware, which we'll talk about soon. But we obviously all missed sort of the big focus of this hardware. And that's going to be the same thing, I think, whatever happens with mobile, that they have a plan, they're working on stuff, but what that is, I don't think any of us are really going to be able to guess it until that day when it actually happens. But for now, they're going through specific categories, right? They first started with a tablet. Let's take on the whole iPad thing that's happening right now. And they came out with the Surface, which was a very unique device, and it wasn't an iPad competitor. It did that plus more. And then they came out with the Surface Book, which is basically a Mac competitor, but it was that and more. And then of course they had HoloLens, and now we also have this week we had the Surface Studio, which took on the iMac, but once again did more. And so if you kind of take that patterning, there's not too much other categories they haven't done yet. There's the wearables, and then there's going to be, of course, mobile. And those are really the only two ones that I think are left for them to sort of tackle at this stage. Of course, we're hearing now spring is still going to be the plan for Surface Pro 5 and Surface Book 2. And so they will be, of course, refreshes of the current lineups and everything like that. But I don't know. It was not only that, I would say if you follow on Twitter and the more general, broader media about how this Microsoft event went down, people were very impressed by what Microsoft had to offer. And, I think that's always just really good for them to see that message turning around. There was this idea that like Microsoft was uncool, and I still think there's a little bit of that, but we're seeing it chip away. The fact is they were never going to release a single product or a single commercial where this was going to sort of change the tide for them. But I think they're definitely getting there. There's a lot of people who are like reconsidering, who are Apple users, reconsidering now going back to Windows, and that's really telling, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Apple aren't helping themselves, are they? No, with their hardware announcements as of late. I think we should probably talk about the biggest feature coming in the Creators Update, Paint 3D, which it kind of annoys me that the biggest feature is Paint 3D, but at the same time, it's kind of cool to see this program we've known for so long evolve into the next generation, I guess. So Paint 3D, as it says on the tin, it's a 3D version of Paint. It has all the normal 2D functions, new user interface, of course, with pen support, which is fantastic, plus a whole nother kind of level of creativity. So you can now draw in 3D, create 3D objects, customize them, make them yours, I guess. And then you can upload them to the Remix 3D, I think it's called, community, and you can share your creations that you made in Paint 3D, download other people's creations, and then even 3D print them or display them within a HoloLens if you have a HoloLens like Dan does behind him. He can use Paint 3D, then create something within Paint 3D, and then put it in his world via HoloLens. It's kind of fantastic. And again, with it being the Creators Update, this app makes sense. And Microsoft calls it 3D for everyone, although the current Remix 3D preview is only available in like 6 or 7 countries, which is unfortunate, of course. Regardless, I think it's pretty cool. Again, it's not something I personally am going to use. The only time I use Paint is to, change the format of an image or crop something. I don't use it to create like huge things. I know there are some Paint artists out there. But regardless, it's a fantastic app. Good to see Microsoft bringing older programs to the Universal Windows platform, of course. Not sure if there's a mobile version coming though.
No, there is. Actually, we just ran a story. There is a
Oh,
mobile version of Paint coming. It's in the alpha right now, so it's being tested. I suppose this was one downside of this event, which is it was all about creativity. A lot of it was about drawing. A lot of it was, and I don't do any of that. So
yeah,
like,
no.
and I'm really poor at drawing, and so I'm interested in the pen. Paint is funny for me because I use Paint every day, but I use it for just like copy pasting images, mixing things, even doing stuff on the site. I use it for, but it's a very simple app, and that's why I kind of love it. The new Paint 3D is way more powerful. It's actually very impressive how it hooks into the was it Remix website that they have now, and you can download 3D content through the app onto your palette and start mixing and matching. And it's actually really intuitive and powerful. I was using it last night in the Surface Book. If you saw my Twitter, I created a really horribly bad uh,
Yeah, so did I.
piece of art. Yeah. But I have to admit, it was still fun using the pen and goofing around with it, and it works very well. It's still obviously in the, I guess, a beta stage, as you could say, but it should be coming out relatively soon for non-insiders who want to go and download it. But it's an impressive piece of basic native hardware or software, I should say, that's going to come to all Windows 10 devices. And I guess this is why, when I've talked to OEMs and then also Microsoft in the past, we asked them about the touchscreen stuff. Like, what happens when your partners release devices that don't have touchscreens? Does that like bother you? Especially since we've seen some, I would say, enterprise level devices launch without touchscreens. And Microsoft was kind of like, it's going to be kind of their loss, and you can tell that they had a lot of plans for inking and drawing on screens and doing this kind of work. And if OEMs didn't see the value in that, they were going to just continue to push ahead with these updates. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. There's going to be, when you look at where Surface was a couple of years ago, and it always had a pen, but you couldn't do that much with it. But now you see what with inking, and it's in Maps now, which is really cool. And you can do all these other things with, OneNote. You're going to see this stuff really, really push ahead. It's not like a gimmick for them. It's not a single one-off thing. They're building their whole vision of computing sort of around the pen, and as well as mixed reality and HoloLens. I thought the really cool thing was the HoloLens aspect. So we didn't hear anything much about HoloLens. I mean, they showed some stuff, but the real big news there was what they learned from HoloLens and how it's trickling down now to normal technology. So HoloLens famously cost $3,000. And when it first came out, and even up until a couple days ago, people were like, what's the point of it? Like, no consumer is ever going to spend $3,000 on this thing, especially since it's like, what is it for gaming? You're going to use it for apps. Like, who's going to actually buy this? And we've been, of course, saying, well, it's enterprise, it's development, it's, a different level of professional group out there. And then what we saw this week was their OEM partners are stepping in, and now these devices start at $300. I mean, that's a huge drop in price. Now all of a sudden, this is a lot more accessible. And they're talking about the entry level for VR. They're basically bringing the cost down, because if you still want to do VR today, it's actually still very expensive. And so they're bringing that down. Now, and I was talking to some people at Microsoft about this, and they're like, this is just how we're doing this. It's like we released a Surface. It was really expensive. It showcased stuff we wanted to do. And then our OEM, and that was the first level. And then our OEM partners stepped in, started creating specialty devices that were cheaper, sometimes even better. And now 2-in-1s and tablets and convertibles are basically standard in the PC industry now. And same with they said is HoloLens. HoloLens was the primary device. It's going to be the best one out there, kind of the most expensive, but it really kind of does everything. And now their OEM partners, we're in level 2. Here come their OEM partners now creating their own devices. And in theory, a company could create a HoloLens that's even more expensive, right? They can create one that's like $5,000. That's even like more ridiculous. But they can also create ones that are $500. And so now we're going to start to see that creativity happen as well. And I think that's a standard approach. You're going to see that for all their devices going forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think some of the hardware, the upcoming reality headsets, I guess, are VR, which Microsoft kind of showcased in concept as well at this event. They showed off their HoloShell, which is another Resident 2 Creators Update feature, where you, instead of using like an augmented reality, which places holograms in the real world and the Windows UI and stuff, Microsoft is working on a virtual reality version of that as well. So obviously it's a virtual room like with the HTC Vive or the Oculus Rift, and you can do the same thing. So you can use HoloLens, Windows Start holograms just within a virtual world instead, which is also pretty great. Again, you can have like my Edge pinned to a virtual wall and stuff, and I guess it would be technically more immersive. But of course, that's the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality, and we can argue all day which is better. Fact of the matter is, Microsoft is tackling both HoloLens or augmented, then HoloShell. I'm going to call it HoloShell because that's what it's called, like in the system files for of virtual reality. And I think it's good that they're tackling everyone.
It was interesting that the UI that they're demoing was the same one that's in HoloLens. And so although they're betting on mixed reality as being really the future of this stuff, there's no doubt I think virtual reality has its role too. I would just say it's a subset of mixed reality. And that's kind of how they're treating the Windows holographic platform, is that it can basically do all of this stuff. And now this is going to be built into Windows. It's just really kind of interesting. And all these tools have been kind of created around it. And I thought, hopefully we'll hear more about that in December when some of those devices start hitting the market. But it's kind of funny. People are saying now that Microsoft may be the catalyst for VR. And if you think about it, it's because, HTC has their thing out there. There's Oculus that's out there as well. But these are really expensive systems. You can't really just go down to the store and pick them up either. And they're kind of complicated, because it's like, okay, so what do they run? What's the software? Do they have games? But if you can buy an accessory that's like $400 or $300 and it just works off of your Windows 10 PC that you already have, that's a different value play. That opens the doors up a lot more, I think, for just regular people, what may actually be needed. Even with Sony's PlayStation, we've heard mixed things about that, but I'm not sure how many people can go buy a whole new console to do that. And this also raises interesting questions for Xbox, I guess, later on, right? If Xbox runs Windows 10 and Windows Holographics is in Windows 10, what does that say about Xbox and VR? By transitive property, it should be able to do VR without much, but I guess will be how the accessories connect up to it. But there's some options there, at least for Project Scorpio.
Yeah, I mean, that's the power of just Windows 10 everywhere, which is kind of what Microsoft's ultimate goal is anyway. I'm excited for the Holo stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, because for somebody who will, I mean, likely I'll probably buy one of these VR headsets, and it would definitely be interesting to try out the holographic user interface in a virtual world, because you can be at the beach and not be at the beach in real life. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So moving on, I guess, to hardware announcements, because hardware was all the craze this week. First up, Surface Book, which was kind of a surprise to all of us. We had heard some things like Microsoft may be planning a refresh, but we thought it would be like a Kaby Lake refresh since the new CPUs for Ultrabooks are out now. Apparently not.
Yeah, and the Kaby Lake thing, we put it down as a maybe because we know Surface Book 2 and Surface Pro 5 are in development. And so the question is, if you redid your lineup with basically updated hardware on the inside, we know whatever Surface Pro 5 and Surface Book 2 will have will be Kaby Lake as well. And so now if they're running the same kind of internal hardware, you're kind of also shooting yourself in the foot in terms of people getting new devices because you just sold them on this new one. So what they did, though, they created a new SKU level, they call it, for Surface Book. And so it's basically a higher end Surface Book, as if it wasn't high enough. And so now they have this new one that is same Core i7. But what they did was they added a beefier GPU to it with the NVIDIA GTX 965M, which has 2 gigs of video memory as opposed to the 1 gig that the other high-end Surface Book had before. And in order to cool that device down, they had to basically make the base a little bit larger to blow more air around on the inside. And they ended up saying, well, why don't we just stick more battery in there as well? And so they kind of got a little bit of benefit there by putting in this beefier GPU. And that was basically to address concerns that some people wanted to do more with these devices. Now, we always talk about this, especially with Jez, because a lot of people don't understand the distinction, but the Surface Book is only a dual-core processor, even at maxed out to Core i7. But there are laptops that have quad-core processor. So the Dell XPS 15, which is one of my favorite ones, uses a quad core, and there's a big difference between performance in those. Now, unfortunately, the Surface Book, because it's thin, because it's also a tablet, it doesn't run the quad core, which uses significantly more power, significantly runs warmer, and is just, a bigger chip. So, but they kind of compromised here, and they created this new Surface Book, and we didn't see that coming. And I thought that was kind of a neat idea. However, 965M is an old chipset. I mean, it's not too old. It's because there was a 960 and there was a 970, then a 965 kind of came out. But we know we're on the Pascal series now for NVIDIA. And so those are the 1060s, well, there's a 1050 now too, 1060, 1070, 1080. And those offer a significant boost in processing for graphics. So it's a bittersweet thing. You can buy the Surface Book, you can order it now. Street date is November 10th, so just about 2 weeks from now. But we know whatever Surface Book 2 comes out with may have even more powerful hardware. And we know that redesign, the hinge, is supposedly still in the works, so they're going to basically thin it out, which ironically is now kind of thinned out anyway, or it's a little bit smaller because there's a hump now on the new Surface Book. So I don't know how I feel about this. It's a tough thing to recommend people go and buy this. It's still powerful. It'll still get a lot of jobs done, but we kind of know Surface Book 2 is looming in the horizon, and that's always kind of the problem here with this technology.
I mean, it's not like most people can buy it anyway, since it's only available for pre-order in the US right now. Unfortunately,
Right.
for those in the UK and elsewhere, we don't get one. Not yet, anyway. And I think by the time Microsoft are ready to release this to the rest of the world, or at least more countries, a Surface Book 2 will be imminent. Because of, as
Yeah.
what we've heard, spring for the new hardware. It doesn't make sense for them to, release the Surface Book 1 with higher specs in January, February, because, February, March, we could have Surface Book 2 and Surface Pro 5. And those people who bought, the Surface Book 1 with performance base will be annoyed.
Yeah. And I don't know, this is one of those really interesting things too, because if you look at poor Apple users who've been starving, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, for new MacBooks for so long. I mean, there were people using MacBooks from 2012, which, as someone who does this for a living, that kind of blows my mind, right? It's sort of like, God, that's like so old. It's like, but I also understand people have budgets and they just can't afford to go buy $2,000 laptops every year. Now, having said that, a Surface Book running Skylake Core i7 with this GPU on board is still a powerful machine, and it will still be powerful in 2 years from now. So it's one of those things where, yeah, whatever Kaby Lake can offer a little bit more performance and runs a little bit cooler, a little bit better on battery, but it's not a huge difference either. It's like 10% basically. So I think that there are going to be some people who would buy this and still be fine with it. It's like the same people who are still running laptops from 3, 4 years ago are still kind of happy and like, oh, it gets the job done. So I think we do need to separate a little bit the people who, are kind of cutting edge and they always need the latest and greatest, and they actually know what Skylake and Kaby Lake are. Like if you're following this conversation, then yeah, you're probably one of those people who are like, oh, I'm going to wait for Surface Book 2. But if you talk to someone and be like, "Oh, did you hear about the 7th generation Core Intel processors?" Like, what the hell are you talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're Jeds, you
yeah,
buy both the Surface Book performance base and the Surface Book 2 a month later because, Microsoft logo, which is a ridiculous idea. Don't do that.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
either
yeah.
wait
Just
or get what you want now and then obviously upgrade when you're ready. You don't need to buy everything.
and some people were also asking or wondering about whether or not Microsoft is going to sell this performance base as a separate
Yeah.
unit. So you can, if you already have a Surface Book, could you just buy this thing, which is basically the dedicated GPU and a larger battery plus keyboard? Could you just buy that? I asked Microsoft, and they have no plans to offer that as a separate thing, which I think, in a way, I understand it. I don't think there's a huge market of people who are going to actually buy this. And then you do run into this issue of creating a SKU and stocking, have it available and people buying it. At the same time, I think they should do it because, okay, you don't want to necessarily go into Best Buy and have these things sitting on the shelves. I don't think they would sell. But you should have an option to order direct from Microsoft, this base, basically, with the caveat like, hey, this could take, 3 to 4 weeks before it gets to you because we're going to actually make it just for you to send out. Like, I think there are people who would actually totally be fine with that, and I think that would solve the problem of like, how many of these do we create, and what happens if we run out, all that kind of stuff with the stocking of a new SKU. I think that's the way they can kind of get around that. And I wish they would do that because I think there are some people, especially if you buy like a Core i3 version. But I guess I don't know. I guess it's an interesting question. Like,
See, the problem
does
with
this
this,
run
the
does
pro-
this run with the Core i3 and Core i5 or?
I mean, yeah, that could be a limitation. I wouldn't know the technical details, but the problem, imagine there are no technical details. The problem with this idea is that it makes sense, and Microsoft are a company who don't make sense sometimes, and it's just
Sure.
it blows my mind. I said this on Twitter earlier. It's like I own a Surface Book. I have one right here. I don't want to buy another one just to get 30% extra battery life. Because the Surface Pro 4, I can buy the blue type cover, then I can buy the black type cover with a fingerprint reader. And that's an upgrade technically. I've just given my
Sure.
Surface Pro 3 or 4, an additional Windows Hello bit of functionality. And with the Surface Book, you can't do that. I think part of it is because Microsoft sells the current versions with obviously the screen and the keyboard, and they share one serial number, I think. So obviously, it's like you can't split them, otherwise it would cause problems with their inventory. But then again, like you said, if they built them specifically for people who ordered them, that could be one way to get around that.
And it could cause issues, yeah, for warranties, basically. Like if something breaks, which warranty does?
Right, because if the Surface Book breaks, say if you have an issue with the keyboard, but the tablet portion works fine, you have to send the whole thing back regardless. You can't just send a bit of it back. You have to send,
Yeah.
it attached and in a box away to Microsoft for them to repair it, which again is annoying, but I guess that's just the idea of the product. I'm hoping at some point Microsoft just kind of combine the Book and the Pro in a sense like you can buy the Surface Pro tablet, and then if you want, it also hooks up to a Surface base, like the performance base, or you can attach a touchpad
Sure.
to it or a type cover to it, and it can be both a laptop or or two in one if you want it to be. I think that's the ultimate goal, and that would make sense again as one product for both things. If they can unify Windows, they can unify their Surface line.
Yeah, I'm really curious too. I mean, about how much of a performance boost this is going to give in terms of video performance. Now, like they were still cautious. They're like, you're not going to be able to play Gears of War 4 really on this thing. 965M. I run on the Dell XPS 15 that's got a 960M, which is kind of similar. I think the 965 is just obviously slightly better, but it can do some impressive gaming for what it is. I can play Doom on it, so that's what matters kind of to me. But it's also, not like gamer level, right? This isn't, just still because you still need a quad core system for that to really push it. And this is, it's a nice nod. I actually am more interested in the battery life because it is 2.5 ounces heavier, but it's kind of you have to really struggle to kind of feel that difference. It definitely is visually thicker, but that doesn't bother me either. So I'm more interested in the fact that this has a better battery life, at least potentially.
Didn't they advertise 16 hours?
Yes.
Which
yes.
is a huge boost over the 10 hours that they
Yeah, well,
or 12.
30% more battery. So,
yeah, no, it's a huge boost. I mean, I don't think you'll get that in real world usage, but I mean, it's a nice claim to have at least because I mean, at least
Sure.
they're confident in their product, which is a
Well,
good thing.
Yeah, and on the current one, I could definitely push between 8 and 10 hours of real life usage. So that's just like, not really worrying about anything. So I think if this pushes a little beyond the 10 hours to like 12 hours of actual real world, and for people who get antsy about that, how that's the reason for this, it's a very difficult measurement to actually do because Intel chips now are so good at scaling that back in the past, you would run a chip if it was like 2 gigahertz, you'd kind of stay at 2 gigahertz. And then they started introducing this like, well, when you're not using it though, it ramps back down. And it basically had only a couple levels. But now the new chip scales so much more dramatically in terms of the increments as well as how fast they get there. This is the step technology that they talk about. That it gets really hard when you start to define like, well, okay, well, when I say a normal workday, what does that mean for Dan Rubino versus Zach? How we use our computers are very different, so it gets very difficult to sort of come up with battery estimates. So what they do is they come up with sort of standardized. Okay, we're going to play a video back at the specific resolution and see how long it can go. And so there's a couple of these benchmarks that are out there. That's sort of one we usually hear about is like either video playback or some other type of battery test. But that's why you don't get these. It's 16 hours in theory, but in real world, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, if you were buying I mean, I don't see why your average Joe would buy the performance base because I mean, the performance base is more aimed at people doing, video editing, Photoshop, some heavy tasks. But if you were to just buy one to browse the internet, maybe a couple of YouTube videos, just music, writing a report, browsing Twitter, you could get on the performance base, I would say 13 to 15 hours if they're advertising 16
Probably.
hours. But if you're doing, gaming, editing in Premiere Pro, Photoshop,
Right.
all sorts of heavy programs, you get less. Of course, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
Microsoft, I guess, with these battery tests, they kind of meet in the middle, and
Yeah.
less than what they claim, and then whatever. And then obviously your mileage varies. I mean, even on the Microsoft website, if you read the disclaimers, they do say your mileage may vary. So, I mean,
It's
yeah,
still, yeah, it's still gonna be an interesting. We'll be reviewing the new one, so, but it's gonna be a weird recommendation, I think, for people
I
because
mean, for those of you who don't like the gap, technically this makes it a little bit better by kind of because it's thicker, the base is closer to the screen. But I mean, there's still that weird hinge that you get on the end, which I'm kind of getting used to now. Actually, thinking
oh,
about it.
I really love it. It's funny. I haven't used the Surface Book for a while, mostly because I'm reviewing other laptops. I this week I actually used a new Spectre X360 at the event, and I started using the new Surface Book. It was actually kind of funny too. As I was in the audience and talking all the Surface stuff, I'm like, man, I wish I had my Surface with me because you get sort of this weird envy. But when I got home, I started using the Surface Book again. We did just get some firmware and BIOS updates last night. And I forget how much I enjoy that device. It's just entire design. I still think it is the best design, mostly because I love the aspect ratio, which is a 3:2 type, so it's less narrow. I also like the way my palms rest on it. It's just less stressful. I'm not on the edge of the computer, which on some Ultrabooks you have. It's just a really great device. I'm very excited about trying this new Surface Book. However, I'm not sure I can just tell people go buy, for $2,400 or 20. I think it goes up to 27. If you get the 1 terabyte drive, which is just totally insane, you're going to really max it out. Speaking of, let's, I guess, go into Surface Studio. So this was the real big announcement. Again, our intel was spot on and yet completely off. So we heard there was a report back in June from Digitimes, who, for us in the industry, Digitimes is like a fortune teller. It's like hit and miss. More than half of the stuff they write, we actually disregard. I think they only have an accuracy rating of 10 or 20%. So they reported back then that Microsoft's working on a Surface all-in-one. And then through my sourcing, I actually confirmed that was the case. And they're testing different screen sizes. And that turned out all to be completely accurate, except for the part about it's going to be basically a drawing device, or for engineers, artists, people who need something that can basically, it's a big surface. And we didn't know what form this would take. Would the screen pop off and all that kind of stuff. And we finally got the big reveal. It's a very expensive machine, but we already knew that. I said in the the preview up to this event that whatever it is, it's going to be super expensive. And sure enough, it starts at $3,000 and goes up to, I believe, $4,200 if you get the maxed out version. But overall, it's a pretty impressive device. 28-inch. So we actually said 27-inch and 4K. Then Zach and I were just talking about that's right. Surface always does weird aspect ratio. So this uses the same aspect ratio as the Surface Book, which is at 3:2. And so the resolution now is kind of wonky. It's just like this weird, I forgot even what the resolution is. It's sort of like the Surface Book has a weird resolution. And it comes with a quad-core Core i7, and that ships with Skylake. And the reason for that is because there's no Kaby Lake quad core yet. That doesn't come out until sometime next year. So, but that's fine. It doesn't really matter on desktop. This thing's plugged in all the time. You don't really need battery efficiency. And then it comes with a GPU. There's two forms, I believe. There's the high end, which is the 980M, and then I forgot it was a 965, I think was the other one. And you can get up to 32 gigs of RAM. And it's a beautiful device. They spent a lot of time on that hinge, which I was laughing during when we were covering it because the build-up. Obviously now they set themselves up with these announcements. They show you the device, and then it's like, wait, there's more though.
I mean, but this one, because with the Surface Book, it was a surprise. This one we knew was coming. It was like, come on, that's a bit cheesy. It was a great moment with the Surface Book reveal. We didn't need it for this one, I don't think.
Yeah. Especially since once they showed the big thing is the hinge, it can slide down and go into this like 20-degree sort of angle. I totally expected that. Like to me, that wasn't a big deal. We've already seen like all-in-one device, all-in-one PCs basically do that in the past. So to me, that wasn't really a big deal. The big deal for them, of course, is the hinge is actually a really impressive hinge. They call it a zero gravity hinge. Basically, it just means, yeah, in the video you can see here, they just push it down with one finger, and it completely goes down, and then you can also bring it back up with one hand. And talking to the engineers and people who built this, it's really impressive because when technology is so good, it just works. You don't almost appreciate the effort that went in to create that. But it's funny talking to them about this stuff. We can also mention right there the Surface Dial is being shown. So the Surface Dial, the funniest thing about that, they're like the hardest part of making that device was the rubber bottom. They said they spent months on making just that rubber bottom for it because it needs to, when you put it onto the Surface Studio, it can't slide off. But they also didn't want it to be completely tacky so that when you lift it up, it like stuck, And they spent so much effort making that. And same with the hinge. The hinge has a lot of wiring in it. So if you look, there's nothing coming from the monitor. All the wiring is internal, and it goes through that hinge to the base. And that includes the Windows Hello camera, which is actually some thick cabling. There are 4 tweeter speakers in that display. So that wiring has to run through it. There's also all the touch sensors, which need to also run through that same area. And then, of course, the regular display cabling. So it's a ton of cabling that are going through both of those joints. And again, I think they said there's over like a mile of cabling in this thing. There's just so much wire, but it's all hidden very well and you can't kind of see it. So you kind of don't appreciate that stuff. But when you talk to the engineers about how much time they took to make this happen, it's super impressive. We asked them like, why are you releasing it now? And this is basically the Surface mantra, the team that built them. It's like, well, it was ready. And that kind of, the reason I bring it up is for the mobile people who are listening to this or are wondering about whatever they're going to do for Surface Phone, or that's your answer. It will be done when it's ready. And the team is not going to push this thing out to market or any technology out to market until they're confident in what they have created. And so while they do have, I think, goals for timeframes, they're just going to engineer stuff and create the technology that they need for that project. And if it's not ready, it's not ready. So just for anything else this team creates, just keep that in mind. It's going to be done when it's done. And that's the same thing with the Surface Studio.
I mean, yeah, with the Surface Phone, it being done when it's done, that also relies heavily on Windows 10 Mobile again, which I guess makes sense why we're hearing Surface Phone in possibly 2018, because Windows 10 Mobile, it's being improved over Redstone 2 through 4, and Redstone 4 is scheduled for 2018. Perhaps there's a connection there. Microsoft can't release a Surface Phone until the operating system it runs can do everything the Surface team wants it to do. Inking, Continuum, with whatever, just things that Windows 10 Mobile right now cannot do. So I guess in a way you could say Windows 10 Mobile is holding the Surface Phone back, but at the same time that's a good thing.
Yeah, and some of this is just dependent upon technology. So they told us that another thing people brought up, it's like, well, why couldn't you guys just sell the display without the computer part, And they kind of could, except for they said that the display itself would cost you around $2,000 because the display is basically one of a kind. Like everything in that is customized. It's completely engineered. It uses the G5 coprocessor that's in the Surface Book and Surface Pro 4. And if you don't know what that is, that was a special coprocessor that they made, and it helps with the pen latency. So when you're drawing on the screen, how quick that is. Panos talked a lot about this. Basically, it's the illusion. What makes digital inking not feel like real inking is this reaction of when you draw on the screen, there's that delay. And that latency is very hard to get that in real time for that inking to happen. And that's where a lot of this investment technology happens. And so they created a processor for that. Surface Studio has that same one in there, but they call it G5 Plus because they had to put more sensors in, because the display is so huge, it's 28 inches. They had to put more of these sensors in there so that there's not one part of the screen that has different latency times than other parts of the screen. And so when you think about all the stuff that they went in there, sometimes you just can't, make this stuff until other companies and other technologies allow you to basically, mass market and create it. And so that's an interesting aspect, I think, of any device they create. But it's a beautiful piece of hardware, and we'll talk about this in some other articles we'll be doing on the Surface Studio. But like one question, so the GPU again, not totally high end. There's no Pascal in this 1060, 1070, or 1080. And we had heard it; they might have had a 1080 in there, and so we asked them about that. Couple constraints here. One is the base itself is super tiny, and so you can only fit so much into that. The other thing is heat. So if you run a 1060, 1070, or 1080, they run very hot. Of course, you can get around hotness. You create fans and ventilation systems and water cooling, and that's what a lot of us have in our towers. But this thing is so tiny that they don't have that luxury. So it has fans in it, of course, but it's a radial fan. So what that means is if you have a Surface Pro 4, like that same vent, it goes all the way around the edge. There's no single out vent for cooling. And that's a design thing, right? You kind of want that. You have that too in this device. So it's a radial vent that goes around the edge of the top. So there was no option here to create a giant blower. Second, they didn't want people like drawing on the screen and being creative and then hearing basically a hair dryer below the display because this thing was getting so hot. So there's definitely, this was driven by form as much as function. And I think people need to remember about this device. The function it's created for, it appears to do that very well. If you're drawing, you're inking, you're creating on it, it should do that. And the form mirrors that. It's not, however, a high-end gaming machine. They did show you can game on it, of course. They showed Record, they showed Halo Wars 2, I was able to play that. A quad-core Core i7 with some graphics boost will definitely handle that, no problem. But again, you're probably not going to want to play Gears of War on this and do 4K gaming. It's not what this was built for. And that's a weird thing because you're spending $3,000 to $4,000 on a machine, but it's its own thing. If you're an artist or an engineer, and if you go on social media and everything, these people were like totally blown away by this. And this is an area that Apple used to really sort of nail. And now it looks like the Surface team is doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be talking more about that in a minute. It's like Apple's lost their mojo.
Yeah.
To Microsoft. Microsoft is building and innovating where Apple have kind of just went, we don't need to touch it anymore. So I don't know what Apple are doing. Regardless, there's some people in the comments here asking about Home Hub, which is, of course,
right,
a thing that we heard would be announced. Home Hub is we believe, a software feature for Redstone 2. We don't know exactly what it is or what it does. There were rumors of a hardware component to it that could hook into Home Hub, some kind of Amazon Echo competitor or like a home cloud storage device. There were many kind of rumors of what it could possibly be, and it wasn't announced at the event. We're not sure if they're going to announce one or if they've just delayed it. We're not sure. It was just a thing that we heard. Home Hub specifically is what we heard about, and that is a software feature. The hardware stuff is less. We know less about the hardware stuff.
Yeah, again, this may come down. We don't know anything about this project, what it entails for hardware or software, what the game plan is for it. We have heard, Zach has from his sources, mine from my sources, and from his sources that, there is something going on here with that. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. You have Xbox, which runs Windows 10. You have Cortana. You have these phones and PCs all in people's houses. So what does that mean for if you want to do home automation? So I think there's clearly a game plan there. It's just they're not in a rush. Microsoft's definitely not in a rush to release anything until they're confident it's ready. So hopefully we'll hear more. I want to address a question in comments. Someone says, how come Surface Studio doesn't have Windows Hello? It does. It has a full HD camera in the front with the facial recognition. Of course, it would do that. So no, that's definitely there as well. It also has 4 USB ports on the back for expansion, no Type-C. These are Type-A, so more of the legacy Type 1s. I think that's okay. It does have DisplayPort out, but you can't run displays into it, which is kind of a bit of a bummer. It means if you have a Surface Book and you want to use just the display to plug into or another computer, you really can't do that. But you can, of course, daisy chain to other monitors from using this as a base station. So there are some limitations for this.
I mean, if you wanted to put your Surface display on the Surface Studio, you could just mirrorcast it. I assume that the Surface Studio can do that with the Connect app, which arrived with iOS 1. This device does ship with the anniversary update, right?
It should. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
be shocked if it didn't. Yeah.
Because it's coming December 15th, so yeah, it has to. Obviously, it'll have to arrive with
At least the
the anniversary
Core
update.
i5 version does. The Core i7 won't ship until apparently early 2017. It's going to be, and so this raises the other question that we talk about all the time, which is availability. Um, this is in the US. It's going to be limited in the US too. So even if you really want this device, you're going to be kind of on a waiting list. And then presumably it'll start to roll out to other countries. They do that for a few reasons. One of them is just sheer production. One of the fascinating things about the Surface Book is that machine is actually created from a single piece of magnesium. I forgot, like it weighs like a pound or something like that. And what they do is it gets machined. Each one is individually machined. It takes about 45 to 55 minutes, I think, to machine out one of those pieces. And it's a very, very strict hardware creation. There's no room for error on these. And now, if you look at Surface Studio is not made from magnesium; it's actually aluminum. It's mostly because it's a little bit cheaper. It's better for this purpose, but it's really hard to create the production line for these devices. They're not just pumping them out like cheap plastic parts. And they also want to make sure that when people are buying this, if there are any issues early on, they can catch them and adjust their production. Because you can do a lot of testing internally, but until you start putting it out into the wild, you don't know, what's going to happen. So they want to pay attention to that feedback. But it'll be another slow rollout. That's Microsoft's thing, unfortunately. So I think
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, I know in the US at least, when Microsoft announces a product, it's not long before it comes out. Like the Surface Book Performance Base, that's out November 10th, I think, or it's out. It's sometime in November, so it's pretty quick turnaround. With the Surface Studio, I mean, even in the US, you might be on a waiting list, like you say, and for the rest of the world, who knows?
yeah.
Who knows at all? I mean, if it does, I assume if it doesn't sell all that much in the US, why would they bring it elsewhere?
Yeah, there's that too. They need to adjust production accordingly. So it's going to be a slow process. Again, and people need to think about it's $3,000 to $4,000. How are they going to afford that? What does this do for regular people? Again, people need to think about now what this device is, what this device will be in 2 to 3 years. And by that, I mean OEMs now will sort of start to take their own spin on this. Like Dell, Acer, Asus, they could all go out, HP especially, could go out and create their own version of this. Maybe a smaller display, only 24 inches or 25, maybe lower resolution, and improve upon it, bring the price down, bring a competition element to it. And the idea here is that this is a category creation device. So Microsoft created the perfect one, in their opinion, and now they're going to let their OEM partners get to it. So the idea here is that in a couple of years, a lot of people will have these kind of devices, and it'll change as the technology improves, of course, too. So I think it's important to keep in mind.
I mean, a lot of people have been saying the Surface Studio finally innovates and improves upon the only one that we know today, like the iMac, which many would argue, innovated on how we think of PCs. Building it all into the display, which at the time was pretty cool. Now Microsoft have come along and done it again, added more things to it because the Microsoft Surface line has always had like a theme to it. It's always to innovate and to do things differently. And all of the devices they release always do more than one thing. Like the original Surface was a tablet that could also be a laptop if you wanted it to be. Same with the Surface Pro. Then, of course, you have the Surface Book, which is mainly a laptop, which can also be a tablet. It's the other way around. It can do more than one thing. Of course, it's also like a technical, they call it clipboard. Then, obviously, the Surface Studio is an all-in-one, a PC that can also turn into a huge canvas that you can lean on and
Right.
draw and, the Surface dial, twist things on it and do all kinds of crazy things. And Apple kind of haven't done anything. When they announced the iPhone, they innovated the iPhone, then they leave it. The same with the MacBook Air, which was like the first Ultrabook, if you will.
hmm
The MacBook Pro, which was kind of like the first powerful laptop. Well, not the first, but the one that made everybody copied Apple with regards to all of their designs. Now that trend's kind of stopped, and it's switched to Microsoft. Everybody's trying to copy two-in-ones. You see all sorts of OEMs, with the tablet with the kickstand now, which has like attachable keyboards. Microsoft started that trend, and it's before everybody used to imitate Apple. Now everybody's imitating Microsoft. Microsoft is the new Apple.
Yeah. I'm not really sure what's happened with Apple in that regard. I mean, this stuff isn't easy, right? This idea of like seeing inking as the future, and there is a lot of research to show that people who draw in ink have better memory retention of what they're doing versus typing. There are a lot of things you can do. I think people got used to sort of try to ink with a mouse cursor and trackpad, but it's not nearly as immersive as being able to touch on the screen, and it takes a lot of effort to say, okay, this is where we think computing is going, especially since it seems counterintuitive. We got away from pens and paper, and now we're bringing it back in a digital form. So it's hard to do category creation. You can do a big, Microsoft has experience in this in the past. The Spot watches, were an attempt at category creation, but it was too early at the time. They didn't do enough, and there just wasn't enough of a market yet for those things. So you can actually do a big whiff if if you try to create a new category. It can be very difficult. So it takes a lot of research, a lot of confidence, and you have to have your game right to do it. Um, and I don't know what's happened with Apple. We go through cycles. That's the funny thing. It's what's happening with Apple now, and Apple's kind of going down, seemingly at least in mind share compared to Microsoft's ascendancy. This is just the markets, how it works. Companies sometimes need to be, and the same thing will happen, right? Apple may be going down now, and it may continue as a trend, and eventually they'll bottom out, and then they're going to get reinvigorated and come back, and that's just the cycle of technology. So I think it'd be weird if a company was always on top forever and never screwed up or lost talent. That's not how the things work.
No, I mean
The Surface Dial. I was going to say the Surface Dial is actually kind of one of the most interesting aspects of all this because it's a $99 device. It runs on Bluetooth. It can connect up to any Windows 10 device. You can use it on a Surface Book and Surface Pro, of course. And there's a firmware update apparently coming sometime next year, which will allow you to place it on the screen. So right now, it only works on the display of the Surface Studio. So you put it on the display, and the display recognizes it, kind of thing, and it allows you to do stuff. Right now, for other Windows 10 PCs, though, you can use it to the side of your keyboard and just as a dial, and there's a virtual dial that shows up on your display. I also think on a Surface Book it'd be kind of weird because the dial is like this big, and that your display is only so big, so you're gonna be blocking off some things. But what's cool about the Surface Dial, of course, is it has open APIs that Microsoft created, so anyone making an app can basically go through and say, okay, we're going to use the Surface Dial in our app if you want to, and just like if you add mouse controls to an app or something like that. So we know Spotify and Pandora, it's going to act as like a volume knob. If you're in an app, it'll recognize the Surface Dial. I spoke to Microsoft about gaming, ideas if that could be done, and they basically said, it wasn't designed for that. You're using Bluetooth. There could be latency issues and all that, but I guess in theory, it could still happen if it's a more, real-time strategy game where timing isn't necessarily that important.
Yeah, I mean, the Surface Dial again, like you say. I'm actually surprised that they're enabling it for the Surface Pro 4 and Surface Book because to me it doesn't make sense. Again, like you said, the screen is too small.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's good though. I mean, so artists who can't afford a Surface Studio can add this additional functionality because I mean the Surface Book and the Surface Pro already have pen support anyway. So I mean, it's good in that regard. I'm pretty excited about this new Surface Studio. I'm excited to see where Microsoft takes the Surface Studio and how they improve upon it with a Surface Studio 2 and 3 and so on. It's always a pleasure seeing Panos on stage, talking about his products. I mean, people on Twitter when the event was on, pretty funny. There's all sorts of pictures of him, just jumping on the device. He just loves them. When he's talking about them, you can see it. He reeks of passion when he talks about his devices, and I get that's kind of rare. Like you see people unveil devices all the time. And they're just like, yeah, I'm reading from a script. This is the new device. But with Panos, he's like, I built this. I put my blood, sweat, and tears into this. This is everything. This is everything I've been doing, and you can just definitely see it when he talks.
Well, it's also the attention to detail. You could think, everything was just very well thought out. The problem, of course, is, like we said, specific task creation. So the Surface Studio is meant for a specific group of people and professionals. And while, I would love to have one, even for my usage and what I do in life, it's not necessarily something that I need. Like first, I draw terribly, so it's like real limited usage there. I also run 3 monitors on a pretty big tower, so but that's okay. Yeah, I tell people just because Microsoft creates something doesn't mean it was necessarily created for you, and that's fine. That's
Yeah.
this is why we have OEMs out there to basically fill in that gap. But they set the sort of standard for this stuff. So very interesting stuff. I guess we can lead into Apple. We'll just talk about briefly this week. So after years, they finally updated their MacBook line, the new 13-inch and 15-inch device. It was, Apple can't keep a secret anymore. So we already knew about all this stuff coming ahead that was going to have this little OLED bar at the top, which was something that Microsoft had experimented with back in the Vista days. There was the gadgets and these little screens, secondary screens they had on devices. It's a weird kludge, I would say, and because a lot of people think that Apple at some point needs to embrace the touchscreen, which they actually did on the iPad and iOS, but for their Mac products, they haven't. And that's not easy. You can't just put a digitizer on their computers and be like, okay, now it's a touchscreen. You got to do a lot of engineering on the OS level, which Microsoft did for the last few years. And I don't know why, if they haven't done that, maybe because they want to get rid of macOS. There's a lot of talk that macOS may fade out and iOS becomes the dominant platform. But now they have this secondary screen, which is weird because now you have to look down at your keyboard and look up at your display and switch your gaze between the two of them. It's just like if you're not a typist and you have to look down at your fingers when you're typing, you're not nearly as efficient. You sort of stare straight ahead and can type. So it's a weird, I think, workflow that they're trying to sell on people. And it's something that people haven't really asked for. And so that's kind of like a weird thing. Definitely a little bit disappointing. They created a giant trackpad to almost fill in this gap. And I think there are limits to how big of a trackpad. And it was weird, too, because some rumors had the trackpad was going to be massive, but that's because you're going to be able to draw on it using like the pencil, which actually sounded kind of interesting. It's still a disconnect, as we'll talk about with the Yoga book. But they didn't do that. And so the battery life is only about 10 hours because they made it thinner. They really pat themselves on the back, but they can't. The numbers they threw out there for the size of the device and its thickness, it's not impressive anymore because PC makers now for the last few years have been grinding at this stuff. And like their numbers are like okay, but there's like PCs that are way thinner than that and still get better battery life.
It's funny because this is the MacBook Pro. This isn't the MacBook Air they refreshed. This is the full-on Pro version. So professionals, of course, they care about thinness. They care about lack of ports. They care about fantastic, super high quality screens and a huge trackpad that you can't do anything with. This is a product that isn't for professionals. It's for people who would buy the MacBook Air. You can't do anything like it's for you a Thunderbolt. Is it Thunderbolt? USB-C ports. There's no SD card, which I know for a fact that the SD card slot is a big deal breaker for many people, especially in photography and film, because a lot of modern cameras, a lot of really expensive cameras are. They use SD cards, and now the MacBook Pro, the new one, is completely useless. Whereas the Surface Book, of course, has a full SD card slot. And I've seen a few people on Twitter who were going to buy the new MacBook kind of switch paths and go towards the Surface Book only because it has an SD card slot. So that one port makes a big difference for a lot of people. I mean, the trackpad, like you say, it's abnormally huge. I mean, what's the point at that size? Like the Surface Book trackpad is big enough, I think. Like I don't have any issues with it, so I don't see why they would need to make it bigger. I guess for some people bigger is better, of course, and I'm sure there will be someone out there who thinks that the bigger trackpad is better, of course. Regardless, I just think that Apple have kind of missed their target audience here, and whereas Microsoft has kind of jumped in and gone, right, hey, guess what, everybody, Apple sucks, we're the best, come over and join us. And I've seen like even Apple fans who like are completely tied into the ecosystem, who I understand can't leave at this point because they've got the apps, music, games, all that other stuff, who are buying the MacBook Pro with a frown on their face. It's like
yeah, there's a lot of funny things too. A lot of people are asking like, okay, well, how do I charge my iPhone now? And so I know at our sister site iMore, they ran a post about like basically how you do that. 2 of the 3 options included adapters, and one of those was a new cable. So they do make a USB Type-C to Lightning cable, and Apple will be more than glad to sell you that for, I believe it's $27, or you can, which is hilarious for a cable. and of course, or you can use an adapter. And then the third solution was just, why worry about it? Who actually plugs their phones into your computers anymore? Which is really, I thought was just terrible because a lot of people actually do, especially when they're traveling, do use that. So it just lacks vision, right? This hardware refresh, this seemed to me like a midstream refresh, to be honest. It's sort of like what makers do, within a year or something like that. So nothing they did, though, pushed the boundaries of computing, whereas everything that Microsoft is attempting to do is, okay, let's take the computing model. How can we take this to the next level? Like, what can we do with this stuff that isn't being done today? And they're doing that with the pen, the mixed reality stuff. So we also saw how coming next year is more mixed reality stuff. So I got to demonstrate it was a Surface using the rear camera, and it uses the mixed reality. So you can take those 3D objects from Paint and basically use the camera and put these objects into the real world, and it would scale up. And it was really cool stuff. And we've seen this before on phones kind of do these kind of things, but not to this level with these 3D objects. And this is kind of the stuff that Microsoft's getting into. It's just like, okay, it feels like, I don't know, it feels like when PCs first came out, it's like, okay, what can we do with PCs? And you had all these category creations and people going, oh, we can do awesome gaming on this. We can do computer-aided drafting with this stuff. Some people are like, I'm just going to do word processing. But we saw this sort of category stuff. And now I feel like that's what Microsoft's doing again. It's like, okay, we have a lot of processing computing power in our hands these days. What can we do with this that we're not doing today? And that's a really, like I said, it's a tough thing to answer, but they're stepping up to the plate and saying, this is where we think people are going. But, like I said also in the past, like I have a Surface Book. I actually don't detach the display very often. I use it as a laptop. I also don't use the pen very often, so not everybody's going to get a benefit from this, but at least they're trying.
I mean, this is what I was saying. A few years ago, Apple were the company that innovated. Everybody would expect Apple to announce a product and release something that does something new, something that we didn't think was a thing on devices, and then we obviously learned to love it and stuff. They used to innovate, and now they don't do that no more, and it's starting to show. People are starting to notice, and Microsoft are kind of picking up where Apple are failing now. Microsoft are starting to innovate, starting to think outside the box with their devices, and I think it's good. It's good news for us at least, because
right,
we're in the ecosystem. We get some cool products now, whereas for years it was, not great. It's finally looking good for us, which is good.
Yeah, and Nadella, when he got on stage, pointed out something that, a lot of the competitors, and I think he was specifically pointing out Apple, have been creating devices for consuming media. And that's really what an iPad is, right? It's mostly, and that's my complaint I always said about it. I'm like, it's a beautiful device. I mean, I love the iPads. The way it feels in the hands, how thin they are, the battery life. But they're mostly made for consuming. And my lifestyle is just not that. I can't just sit around all day and just like enjoy using technology. I need to use it for creating stuff. And that's why like I have an iPad mini, and I still think it's a beautiful device, but I'm like, I can't do much with this stuff. And there's turning the tables now. They're like, all right, well, we're going to give tools to people so they can actually create things and be immersive. And I think that's really interesting. And they always bring up the children, the kids. They talk about Minecraft a lot, which we always knew that they bought Minecraft basically as a way into getting the next generation. But they're learning from how kids are using computers in Minecraft and creating these digital worlds and 3D and all this kind of stuff. And that's what they're building their products around, is this sort of next group of people who are raised differently than like how I grew up with a PC. And I think that's just really smart.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely looking bright for Microsofties right now.
Yeah. I just thought it was also funny Apple got rid of the glowing apple.
Yeah, I liked that on the app. I kind of
it was, well, a lot of people point out it's iconic, right?
Yeah.
It's you would see these things light up at events or coffee shops and it'd be that apple, and the fact that they got rid of that, I think, I don't know, it's really bizarre.
Too much of a battery drain on the thinner MacBook
But
Pro.
I don't think it was the battery though. It just used the display, didn't it?
I don't know.
That's all that was. I think it was just the display, the backlight from the display just shining through. I think
that's kind of clever. I guess they don't care anymore.
Yeah.
So. Oh well, who cares? It's Apple.
Yep. So that's that. Quickly, Lenovo book. So I finally got my Lenovo book in. It's an interesting device. I haven't had as much time to sit down with it. It's still eerie how that keyboard lights up like that. It's just, it looks very futuristic. Typing actually is not that bad for me on it. I actually don't mind, But like we said, it's in your review too that it's not a main laptop, so you're not going to be banging out whole articles on
No.
this. But it's kind of interesting. The pen thing is weird. I understand now the disconnect between drawing on the bottom half and seeing it on the top half is a little strange. But yeah, I'll need a few more days to kind of play around with it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't find typing on it to be all that bad. I can see how the pen environment being separate from the screen is some people like that because they can obviously see where the pen is on the screen and without like their hand being in the way or the actual ink
Right.
pad being in the way, which is a benefit for some people. But like I say, you have to treat it as a tablet because that's technically what it is. It's not a laptop, even though it looks like a laptop and it's running Windows
Right.
10 Pro, I think, or Home. It's running Windows 10. It is it is a tablet, and you need to treat it like one. You can't be running Chrome with a million tabs because it just won't happen. It's an atom
That's how
processor.
I
So,
browse.
yeah, exactly. You can't do it.
Yeah. So, well, more on the Yoga Book in the coming days, probably as well, because at least once again, it's an interesting device that's sort of pushing the boundaries of what we can do with computers these days. And you don't know until you try. So, kudos to Lenovo, at least for creating something that we haven't seen before. So, there we go. I think that's an hour and 10 minutes. I think that's enough for this podcast. That's definitely quite a bit of material for people to chew on. We'll be, of course, focusing more on the new Surface Book in the coming weeks, as well as Surface Studio and what Microsoft's doing. Also, pay attention to Windows Central for more information on Windows 10. I want to say Redstone 2, but now it's the Creators Update. We got to rename that. So hopefully we'll start to see more features hit our phones. Also, real quickly, Elite X3 got another firmware update this week. So that's the second one from HP. Improved the camera stability, specifically tap to focus is now a lot better, as well as some double tap to wake stuff. How are you still enjoying that phone?
I'm still using it as a daily driver. Definitely seems
Yeah.
faster with the latest
Yeah,
firmware update.
yeah, I think, and although we always joke around about that, I think what Zach specifically means, of course, is the animations feel more fluid now,
Hmm.
and in that sense, it feels faster. It just feels smoother, where that stuff used to be kind of janky. So it appears to be more optimizations going on, but I expect HP to continue to update its device a lot, especially as it gets in the hands of companies who are going to be a lot more demanding than one or two customers who are actually using it. Because if you think about it, only one or two customers using a device, you know, give feedback versus an IT department who may have a couple hundred, may be like, hey, we're having a huge problem with this, fix it. So it should be really interesting to see. But yeah, head to Windows Central for more information on that stuff, and we'll be doing a lot more next week and everything as the holidays roll around. But thanks for listening. And Zach, I guess where should we follow you? If you want to do the Twitter thing?
Oh, it don't matter. You don't have to follow me. Just kidding. Follow me on Twitter at Zach Bowden. I tweet funny things sometimes serious things about Microsoft, sometimes relaxed things. I'm all over the place on Twitter.
There you go. And you can follow me at Daniel_Rubino. That's R-U-B as in boy, I-N-O. And if you missed the Apple event, that's a shame because I'm very snarky during those. But I had a very good meme day, I suppose, yesterday. But there you go. Thanks for listening and take care, everybody.